We have too much stuff, and it's the curse of mass production capitalism, right? Well, I mean, they had less stuff in the past, or did they? They certainly didn't have a drawer full of mystery chargers and cords 100 years ago, but maybe that junk drawer was filled with other things. We seem to be constantly at odds with clutter and things in our lives and homes. There's this weird trend of people going analog, which doesn't even mean that, and ditching their phones and computers to simplify everything, only to find they now need calculators, writing supplies, books, maps, and so much more to replace a tiny box. But we certainly get a lot of flack for spending too much on frivolous items. If only we hadn't bought that new phone or fancy coffee maker, maybe we could just save up for buying a house or just buying groceries. They must have had way less stuff if they could afford all those things a century ago when they weren't so mass produced. Or maybe it's all just a load of myths. Well, first we should probably define what stuff is. A century ago, they used terms like household furnishings or goods. It basically encompasses everything in your living space that isn't permanent. For the purposes of this video, we're going to narrow that down to everything that isn't furniture as well. So it's everything from decor to kitchen appliances to towels to books. If you'd have to pack it up to move, it's stuff. And well, it does seem like we have a lot of it. Certainly too much when it comes to finding a place for it all. Did they have that problem too? Here's the thing. We don't keep lists of how much stuff we actually have. Maybe the valuable things for insurance purposes, but even a small apartment can fit in dozens, if not hundreds, of items. And that's the same problem we have with researching the past. They have occasional records like probates, but those only list the valuable things after someone passes, not everything. And they aren't always going to beat the best average. Our quantities probably vary wildly throughout our own lives. So, where do we even begin to look for ideas of what was typical? I'm actually aiming for a bit of a range this time, what bare minimum is to what was available to the lower and middle class. No gold plated anything, just regular stuff. Lists of which arrived in their mailbox, just like hundreds of advertisements that keep arriving in your inbox. Not always wanted, but certainly always there. Maybe to the list of death and taxes, we add advertising spam. Which actually brings me to the sponsor for today's video, Incogni. Incogni tracks down and removes your personal data from hundreds of websites. In just the last few months, they've found almost 800 places where my private information has been picked up by data brokers and sold over and over again to who knows who. Addresses, phone numbers, employers, financial info, even shopping habits have all been handed around. As of now, more than 700 of those have been successfully taken down, and it only takes a few days for resolution. And if I come across anything beyond their list of known problems, they have custom removals as well. With their unlimited family and family unlimited plans, you just submit a link where your information is being exposed, and they'll submit a request for you. It's not just about stopping those annoying fake calls and texts, though. I have noticed a significant difference in how many scams have come through. It really doesn't take much to piece together enough information to have your identity stolen or accounts opened up under your info. It feels like there's so many data breaches these days, we don't even notice them. And there's just no way to keep up with how fast it spreads. Incogni actually has an estimated time saved ticker on your dashboard, and mine is already over 550 hours. There's no way I could have handled that by myself. Everything from your contacts to health, employment, demographics, and even family connections is regularly picked up and sold. So take back your personal data with Incogni. Go to incogni.com/NicoleRudolph and use code NicoleRudolph to get 60% off an annual plan. So let's start with what the basics were, what they needed just to operate in a regular way. The bare minimum to function is actually something that gets listed quite often throughout the century. Now, this is not for the single man of the past who hires out cleaning and eats in restaurants, just like those that have a single folding chair and plastic cups today. These lists, created by magazines, etiquette manuals, and even the government, are for young families, those just starting out or moving into a house for the first time. They often come alongside a budget, but unlike the clothing budget, which usually placed third after housing and food, home goods and other stuff don't have a large annual allowance. It's not because people didn't spend money on that range, more that the expectation was that it came in lumped moments. Getting married, the first home, having kids, moving, expanding, etc. Major events that could be saved for, but were ideally not a regularly reoccurring thing. Unlike clothing, which while clothing kind of counts as stuff, I've talked about that extensively before. They had a huge chunk of their annual budget that went towards clothing, not because it was absurdly expensive, at least compared to even decent quality clothing today, not Shein, but because they genuinely bought a lot. They just had more layers, more underwear, and more that went into a single outfit than just a t-shirt and pants. Buy a good suit every year, but buy a dozen undershirts, often a number for winter and more for summer. Those budgets and lists of recommended wardrobes are extensive because it's a constantly consumed thing. We wear out our clothing a lot faster than our other stuff, which might be a clue. Now, that doesn't mean that household goods budgets aren't discussed. In fact, I found quite a few places mentioning in the 1920 to 50 range that to furnish a new home, meaning furniture and decor and supplies, should be around 1/4 of the home's value. I'm going to let you sit with just how crazy that number would be in the current market, where median, not average, median in the US is around $400,000. Now, median home value in, say, the 1930s was more like $4,000, which was 2 or 3 times median annual wages for one person. So they figured more like half or slightly less of your annual income would need to be saved up for furnishing, which is way more reasonable by modern standards, but still a lot. Starting a new home from scratch is expensive. Also backing up to note that the price of a house has gone up 100 times in the last century, and the income then was around $2,000 per person for a year median. So that would be equivalent to a $200,000 single income being median if it kept up with house inflation. I didn't find any fully comprehensive lists of what an entire house needed beyond furniture, but there were plenty of fragmented ones for specific areas like the kitchen or guest room. The furniture shouldn't be skipped over though, even if it doesn't really count as stuff for this video in the same way. It is, however, storage of stuff. And there's no reason to buy storage if you don't have things to put in it. We'll just come back to focus on that later. As I mentioned, they tend to compartmentalize the purchases for the house. Linens cover beds, tables, kitchen, and cleaning. Appliances cover the kitchen, bathroom, and laundry. Kitchen utensils are very much their own lengthy list. Most of this stuff is meant to cover the household needs category, not individual things like toiletries or consumables like foods. Starting off in linens, because this is probably the least changed category, we still have sheets, towels, tablecloths, etc. A lot of the articles are summed up as a trousseau or hope chest for someone getting married, the bare minimum for a new two-person household. Good Housekeeping in 1931 had a shopping guide that covered the household linens and was fairly extensive. For each bed, they suggested 2 mattress pads, 6 or more sheets, 4 or more pillowcases, 2 or more blankets, and 2 bedspreads. For the bathroom, for each person, it was 4 face cloths, 6 hand towels, 8 bath towels, 6 to 12 guest towels, 2 or 3 bath mats, and a shower curtain. The dining was at least two full sets of tablecloth and napkins, a dozen or more, and don't forget the extra tiny napkins. We usually just call those cocktail napkins now. A table pad, asbestos mat, bridge table cover, and buffet cover are also recommended. Two different sizes if you have an expandable table, of course. For the kitchen and cleaning, it's six pot holders, six dishcloths, six washing cloths, 12 dish towels, paper towels, two or three floor cloths, two or three washing up cloths, four to six dusters, and a chamois for the windows. And if you think that's all an absurd amount, this one from 1932 just simply says one or two dozen for most of that list. 1952, still the same range. I might have about that many table settings because I have the ones from my great aunts, but I haven't even managed a second set of sheets for my bed yet, let alone six or more. So, how much did this add up to in the budget? Well, a 1912 Ladies' Home Journal article for the new bride focuses more on the cost you should expect. For linens, they suggest both a set of damask and a plain tablecloth, the cheaper being $3.50, and hemmed napkins at $2.50 a dozen to $4 a dozen. Tea napkins, $3.50, finger bowl doilies, 12.5 cents each, pillowcases, 20 cents to $2 a pair, sheets, one flat and two pillow, at $3.50. Putting that into perspective, if we go back that far, our median household income has actually gone up about 100 times over. So just move those decimal points over. But lest you think, wow, things were completely unaffordable back then, there's a lot more to the budget. Now we have tons of extra costs like taxes, a car, utilities, much higher rent and mortgages, healthcare, and the list goes on. So we have way less to put towards things like a full set of high quality linens that will last years, if not decades. Regardless, even if we have fewer and lower quality, eventually buying more things over time, that range of items was pretty close to our own. What about the kitchen? If you didn't know, built-in cabinets weren't even common until really more like the 1940s. But if you thought that would result in a smaller list of necessary tools, think again. Now, I'm not going to read off the full list I found because we don't need to be here all day. You can stop and read this one from 1933. Honestly, it covers more than most modern basic kitchens. And for very good reason. Remember, everything was fully from scratch. No packages of cookie dough or pre-made pie crusts. Pre-packaged cereal and chips were barely a thing. A Hot Pocket was a distant dream. Microwavable meals were still a novelty in my childhood. Even something like a flour sifter was absolutely required. Yes, I know that that's a standard baking thing still. Sliced bread invented in 1928 and all that. The section labeled Other Desirable Equipment feels like the list of the dusty stuff that sits in the back of all of our cabinets. Donut cutter, ice cream freezer, butterball paddles, waffle iron, apple corer, and a covered roaster. The rest of the list is pretty standard, and there are infinite articles just like that covering the decades. Again, familiar and covering the vast majority of what we also have in our kitchens when it comes to tools. Maybe electrical appliances will be different. They can't possibly be buying the latest pressure cooker or red light therapy mask they saw on TikTok, then shoving it in the back of the cabinet a few months later, right? Right. Obviously, electrical appliances were still fairly new at the beginning of the 20th century, but it didn't take long for the list of novelties to become necessities. This 1921 list of equipment for a modern home is not just long, but might actually include a few things we don't even bother with today. Doorbells, lamps for lights, lamps for decor, porch lights, electric oven, fireless cooker, dishwasher, water heater, grill, waffle iron, small motor, ventilating fans, shaving mug, curling irons, hair dryer, vibrator, massagers, bed warmer, milk warmer, table stove, toaster, coffee percolator, teapot, chafing dish, egg boiler, sewing machine, vacuum cleaner, washing machine, wringer, iron, boiler, radiant heaters, and fans. Oh, and a burglar alarm. Is this excessive for 1921? Maybe. But by 1929, around 97% of homes in the US had electricity, and all of that list was becoming increasingly common. And to drive it all home, this is how thick a Montgomery Ward catalog was in 1922. It's a reproduction, but still the same size. Over 600 pages of goods sold by a regular department store based out of Chicago. It's not aimed at anyone wealthy, just regular people and common prices, people looking for a deal. Aside from a small section of linens and fabrics, the first half, about 300 pages, is all clothing. Beyond that is an endless array of stuff. Just in case the section on silverware and silver-plated goods for the dining and toilette are too much, you can be a bit more practical with a clock or a penknife. Need a little entertainment in your life? How about a phonograph or a violin? The medical and beauty section is as broad as a modern CVS, though toilet paper is listed at the end of toys and games section. Concerning. Drawing, writing, and typing come next. If you're a bit more house-focused like me right now, they have a selection of draperies, shades, and rugs. Never mind preparing for regular family dinners. China sets come in 36, 55, 56, or even 100-piece sets, which is somehow still only meant for entertaining 12 people. If you think the current trend for bowl plates, or pasta bowls, or whatever you want to call them, is overflowing your dish space, you should see the range that they had. I still have a very full set of china inherited from my grandmother, and boy does it take up space. Admittedly, none of this seems too excessive so far, but there's 150 more pages, and the pictures are getting smaller, including this 2-page $1 section with everything from hair clippers to waffle iron to stoplights to 4 pounds of candy. Followed by so many kitchen items, including a pressure cooker and a dozen different chopping machine options. Bird cages are also in this section next to the butchering saws, which is a little uncomfortable. Back to normal with vacuums, electric washers, yes, they actually did have those in 1922, hand-cranked washers, a multitude of ways to dry your clothes, and 16 different sewing machines to repair them. Then electrical goods. They too had fancy lights for keeping your face young, curling irons, immersion heaters, and hot plates. Quite a few pages devoted to sports and exercise equipment, followed by car accessories and general tools. Granted, the tool section can be more inclusive than our modern hardware stores even are. I can't get a forge for blacksmithing locally. And yes, having spent enough time on a farm that had been around for generations, a lot of this stuff was common. No one else was coming to do repairs on your machinery until more recent rules of only approved repairmen or you void your warranty and that nonsense. I mean, most farmers were still relying on literal horsepower, hence the entire section at the end of horse supplies, which is a great example of just how much stuff had to be kept around for basic house maintenance. One of the only untouched parts of my house is the workbench in the basement, filled with leftover parts, including one of the original light switch plates for a push-button style. It's certainly pared down from what was there originally, no tools or odd parts for electrical or plumbing. Before we turned to digital, maintenance on your own house and equipment was not just more common, for many it was the only option. And that takes a lot of stuff. And again, this catalog is just one example and not an excessive one. The Sears catalog of the same year, it was over 1,000 pages long. They have more than a dozen pages on records, not record players, just records, and another dozen on camera equipment. Move forward to their 1936 catalog, and there's around 20 pages devoted just to electrical equipment and batteries, but most of the examples of electrical appliances have moved into their own areas. This was just in addition to. They were basically just as common as mechanical versions by that point. Priorities change throughout the decades. Less farm equipment, more car repair, for example. But our needs haven't changed that much in a century. Sure, they didn't have a computer, but they probably had a typewriter, paper, pens, calculator, and lots of other tools to make up for it. So if they had lots of stuff for function, lots of clothing and accessories, and as I've already covered before, lots of stuff that was for hobbies or collections, Why do we think that we have more stuff today? Here's my big two-part hypothesis. One, storage. Yes, we have more walk-in closets, but our furniture sucks, and built-ins just aren't a thing anymore. That used to be the key to dealing with a house full of items. In the 1930s, with the Depression, there was a dip in spending on furnishings, a 60% decline in the furniture industry specifically, which had produced nearly $1 billion in value in 1929. The article was laying out just how important a boom in house construction would be for that industry. This is one of the places where that 25% of home value spent on furnishings recommendation comes from. They include kitchen equipment, floor covering, draperies, and accessories as well, but the furniture is the main part of the budget. The basic living room storage would include things like a desk, bookcase, magazine rack, and perhaps additional storage with consoles. I want to point out that a fernery and aquarium are also on this list. A bedroom suite has a vanity, chest, and dresser for storage. The dining room mentions a tea wagon, sideboard, china cabinet, or equivalent. Below, it lists out things like lowboys versus buffets, or corner cupboards versus china cabinet, highboy versus a sideboard, etc. If you don't know what the differences are between all of those, that just speaks to how much less common they are now. Also, pointing out that you can add a fernery or aquarium in that room as well. This was all just a place to start with a small home. And obviously, furnishing an entire house doesn't normally happen overnight. Furniture could certainly be costly when you add it all up, though quality was much better for the price. People of the past also relied on hand-me-downs to get started, and I've spoken about credit systems extensively before as well. Furniture stores were one of the most common uses of personal credit. If you look at those catalogs we flipped through before, there's tons of space devoted to furniture, and most of them offer credit. Most importantly, the furniture is not modern, sleek coffee tables made of glass or open industrial shelving. Cabinets, hutches, armoires, cupboards, buffets, and so many names for a large thing that stores things, often behind closed doors. Occasionally, glass ones for display. Kitchens included things like Hoosier cabinets, which boasted of being so well designed you had a place for every single item just where you needed it. No disorganized junk drawers or rogue apple peelers without a home. As cabinets became permanent, they too advertised the perfect layout and accessories to fit everything you need. I just got this china cabinet from the late 1930s that not only has the display space for your dishes and glasses, but a drawer below intended for table linens. The advertisement for a sister style specifically states that, which, when you think about it, if this is a china cabinet for your plates and glasses, you aren't having to store those in your kitchen cabinets. Not only was furniture built to last for an extremely long time, but it was built with items and purpose in mind, which admittedly was easier a century ago when most of the things that were stored hadn't changed dramatically in decades. I can buy a file cabinet for storing paperwork that's pretty nice, but now that I store everything on hard drives, is there a nice system for that? Or are they all going to be cheap plastic like the CD towers of yore? Because that's only been a problem for a few years and no one really feels like bothering to create furniture for it. We've sort of defaulted to the general plain shelves for function or nice furniture for aesthetics. I feel like those massive TV consoles were sort of the last attempt at keeping up with stuff and style. Which brings us to part two of the hypothesis. Stuff was just less likely to be trash, not less likely to be thrown out, literally less likely to be seen as trash. Basically, basic mechanical items built of metal and wood have a different lifespan, not just in their wear and tear and ability to be fixed, but in how outdated they become over time. When I moved this last time, I had a drawer full of old cell phones, a dead Kindle, and other weird electronics I had stopped using because they no longer functioned, didn't hold a charge, didn't have enough storage space, etc. I held on to them because at the time they felt at least a little valuable. It's oddly uncomfortable to throw away something you spent hundreds of dollars on only just a few years before. They became worthless in a really short span of time. And we don't have the ability as lay people to fix them. They weren't built to be fixed. If anything, they were built to break and go defunct after a few years. A rusty old apple corer can be fixed up. Those early catalogs were full of repair and maintenance items for everything from a car to radios to plumbing. I'm not going to assume everyone was knowledgeable on how to do those things, but I know I'd have way more success repairing a phonograph than AirPods. And as inflation skyrockets up, we're less and less likely to throw away the plastic, electronics, and other stuff that isn't really good anymore, but it's still okay. The multitude of random kitchen appliances and cooking spoons, I only just now got rid of some of those things that I bought when I got my first apartment in college. 20 years ago. And that was all cheap IKEA, which had been hard used. Showed it. I still have all of the tools I inherited from my grandfather, however. Still good, though I have bought newer ones that have comfort grip handles for everyday use. Sometimes you just need a really big wrench, though, and it's all in good shape to this day, pretty much 100 years later. But as I have been shuffling all of my stuff around my house for the last year, working on different rooms, there's almost nothing that didn't also exist in some format when I cleaned out my grandparents' 1950 farmhouse. Granted, a lot of the stuff in my house is from that house, but I remember just how much stuff they had, and it wasn't all useful. It was, however, very well organized. Lots of shelves behind closed doors, built-ins, cabinets, and drawers. The pantry actually extended up into the attic a bit, so there was room for canned goods and banished appliances. That basement was a black hole for stuff, however. The point is, no, we don't have way more stuff now, and we don't have too much stuff. As a whole, you might have trouble, but we all have different situations. Yes, some things did get cheaper, especially with the advent of plastic, but they had 10-cent sections of what was probably not the best quality items too. I'm sure we throw away a lot more, but garbage dumps didn't appear suddenly in 1995 or anything. A century ago, they bought a lot of things that they needed and a lot of things that they didn't. They too bought the latest pressure cooker and light therapy for their face. A list of items just came in a 1,000-page biannual catalog instead of TikTok, and they had the cabinets to store it all away. Like, genuinely, my grandmother was not a hoarder, but she kept so many things. I'm pretty sure the only reason she didn't have twice as much stuff was because my grandfather got rid of a lot of it without telling her. He just kind of like had a timeline going in the basement, whereas things made it to the back of the basement. They were probably had, forgotten about and he could get rid of them. So whereas my grandmother swore she put all of the old clothes and shoes and things downstairs in the basement at some point, none of that survived, unfortunately, for me, the person who would love to have that stuff. But we did keep a lot of antiques. We did keep all the tools. They were constantly being used on the farm. I mean, for goodness sakes, I don't know what family member it came from because that kind of got lost over time. But I have an ice chest from early 20th century before electricity had come to our farm. And when, we stored things in a fridge of sorts, but with ice. And it had been at some point painted sort of that greenish blue tone that was really trendy in the 1930s with fridges and things like that. So it was painted at some point to take it from being oak to something more kitchen appliance appropriate, and then eventually made its way to the barn where it was used to store old rags. My mother is the one that got it out somewhere like the 70s or 80s and refinished it. And it's just been storage in our house, somebody's house, ever since. So things were kept because they were good for storage in any sense. And they were always just full of so many objects. A lot of the antiques and decor that I have comes from the family. It's not all stuff that I went out and purchased. There's just it's extensive how many things there are when you have to move or when someone passes away. I do actually have one of the old records from like a great, I don't know, great aunt that passed away somewhere further down the probate record. Not very much is mentioned on it comparative to what she probably had. Again, it's just the stuff that was valuable, so it doesn't really tell us much. And when you think about it, a lot of these things are aimed at young people who it's like, what do you need for your basics? And then things like probate records are aimed at older people that either died suddenly and maybe still had all of their stuff, but it only lists the valuable stuff, or maybe we're in a situation where they had downsized and were living with their kids and only had a room. So it's hard to say. A lot of these things got passed down through generations, moved around, given to other people because they were still useful. And so the sharing of stuff kind of makes it feel a little different. And again, the really precise storage of stuff makes it feel dramatically different. I keep buying antiques because I cannot find good modern storage. Genuinely, I am so frustrated trying to find something to store my books on. I would like a nice bookcase. It'd be great if some of it was not completely open storage, but I just want a basic but nice looking bookcase. And I've existed for years at this point with just some that I got from Target because they're like, I can barely find any that I think are even going to be good quality and do what I need them to do. They're usually so darn short, as if somehow half-size bookcases are all we need. I know we're in the world of digital, but I still have a lot of books, you guys. I'm like, I need nice big bookcase. And in order to do that, it's like, oh, that'll be $10,000. Like, I'm sorry, what? What? So I've just been hunting all of the local groups to try and drive places around Indiana to get things out of the back of people's Ford Explorers or whatever for a few $100s. It's going well so far. I have two great cabinets and a table. I'm sure I will have more when I have more space. And I started this video because as I'm trying to deal with all of the stuff in my house, I feel overwhelmed by it. Like I have too much stuff. And I realized most of it is inherited. It's not stuff that I want to necessarily always carry around with me. A lot of it is functional, but none of it is stuff that they didn't historically have, aside from a few things that I use for my job. Literally the few things in this room that you can't see behind the camera, like big lights. That's about it. Everything else is an antique or no, frankly, everything. Like so much of my house is an antique, which means that nearly everything in my house that is stuff that was in someone else's house most of the time 100 years ago or more. If I have a house of stuff and most of that stuff is 100 years old or more, why do I have more stuff? Why should I be ashamed of having more stuff? I probably don't even have more stuff. This all just comes back to us wanting to feel like we've one gotten better as a society and things are more affordable and we can look at how much great things we can buy so much great stuff now, and two, also then turning around and shaming us for buying too much stuff because we can't afford anything. It's not actually us that can't afford anything. We don't have too much stuff. We don't spend too much money on stuff. I'm sorry that I might occasionally spend $15 on something that brings me joy. Speaking of, I need to go to class and I need to go get coffee on the way. I am gonna go buy a coffee. Yes, I already own a house. That's not the point. I forget I turned my sound notifications off on my camera. I don't know if it's recording or not, but we hopefully now will know. I gotta go through this fast, MJ, so let's clock it. Kick off.